देश में ये लॉकडाउन 21 दिन का होगा। वर्तमान की मर्यादा है 2 गज की दूरी, मास्क है जरूरी।
Hello and a very warm welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching this special telecast with me, Frank Rausen Pereira. The year 2020 has been different for everyone. Humans, the social animals, spent most of the time covering their faces, staying indoors and practicing physical distancing while outdoors. Before the pandemic claimed lakhs of lives, a terrible bushfire in Australia killed or displaced 300 crore animals. A few months into the year, economies around the world collapsed, job losses are at a peak, and several sectors met their doom. We also witnessed a major election in the midst of all of this. Many are convinced 2020 is a cursed year, the worst in the history of human civilization. Well, I'm not going to go into that, but join me as I recap the year's biggest events over the next 30 minutes. Well, the 2020 United States presidential election was the country's 59th presidential election held on Tuesday, November 3rd, 2020. The Democratic ticket of former Vice President Joe Biden and incumbent U.S. Senator from California Kamala Harris defeated the Republican ticket of incumbent President Donald Trump and Vice President Mike Pence. Here's a detailed report on the 2020 U.S. election.
The US elections in November confirmed Joe Biden as the 46th President of America. Denying Donald Trump a second term after a deeply divisive presidency defined by once-in-a-century pandemic, economic turmoil, and social unrest.
Americans have called upon us to marshal the forces of decency, the forces of fairness, to marshal the forces of science and the forces of hope in the great battles of our time. The battle to control the virus, the battle to build prosperity, the battle to secure your family's health care, the battle to achieve racial justice and root out systemic racism in this country. And the battle to save our planet by getting climate under control. The battle to restore decency, defend democracy, and give everybody in this country a fair shot. That's all they're asking for, a fair shot. Folks, our work begins with getting COVID under control. We cannot repair the economy, restore our vitality, or relish life's most precious moments, hugging our grandchildren, our children, our birthdays, weddings, graduations, all the moments that matter most to us until we get it under control.
Biden settled the issue of his election by clinching Pennsylvania and its 20 electoral votes. After several days of painstaking vote counting, following a record turnout across the country. Biden carried 25 states plus the District of Columbia and one congressional district in Nebraska, totaling 306 electoral votes. Trump carried 25 states plus one congressional district in Maine, totaling 232 electoral votes. The result was the exact opposite of Trump's 306 to 232 own victory in 2016. More than 158 million votes were cast in the election. More than 100 million were cast before election day by early voting or mail ballot due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Trump became the first US president since 1992 and the 11th incumbent to fail to win re-election to a second term. And Biden won the largest share of the popular vote against an incumbent since 1932. The election had the highest voter turnout as a percentage of eligible voters since 1900. Each ticket received more than 74 million votes, surpassing Barack Obama's record of 69.5 billion votes from year 2008. The Biden-Harris ticket received more than 81 million votes, the most votes ever in a US presidential election. Despite a long-standing tradition of peacefully accepting the outcome of the US elections, Trump refused to concede and threatened unspecified legal challenges regarding the vote counting process. Biden's victory, fueled by women and people of color who spent last 4 years mobilizing against Trump, was celebrated as rejection of a president who shattered democratic norms and stoked racial and cultural grievances. Cheers, honking and dancing erupted in emotional display of joy on streets of major cities across the country, including Washington, D.C., where Biden will be sworn into office on 20th January. However, the nation's deep divisions were laid bare as pro-Trump protesters continued to claim that the election had been stolen. The result marked a historic milestone for 56-year-old Kamala Harris, the daughter of Jamaican and Indian immigrants who will become the first women and the first women of color to serve as vice president. Her presence on the Democratic ticket was a rejoinder to Trump, who spent 4 years blaming migrants and attacking women and communities of color. At 77, Biden will be America's oldest president. He'll be sworn into office on January 20, 2021, in the midst of 4 deeply intertwined crises. The health crisis, the economic crisis, the racial injustice crisis, and the climate crisis. Biden has promised to build back better by taking bold actions in all 4 simultaneously, including making unprecedented investment in healthcare, infrastructure, and clean energy. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Well, the severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2 or SARS-CoV-2 was first identified in December 2019 in Wuhan, China. The World Health Organization declared the outbreak a public health emergency of international concern in January 2020 and a pandemic in March 2020. COVID-19 changed life as we knew it. Here's how the disease progressed.
Although it's still unknown exactly where the outbreak first started. Several early infected people had visited the Hunan seafood wholesale market located in Wuhan, Hubei, China. On 11 February 2020, the World Health Organization named the disease COVID-19, which is short of coronavirus disease 2019.
We now have a name for the disease, and it is COVID-19.
During the early stages of the outbreak, the number of cases doubled approximately every 7.5 days. In early and mid-January 2020, the virus spread to other Chinese provinces help by the Chinese New Year migration and Wuhan being a transport hub and major rail interchange. A report in The Lancet on 24 January indicated human transmission strongly recommended personal protective equipment for health workers and said testing for the virus was essential due to its pandemic potential. On 30 January 2020, with 7,818 confirmed cases across 19 countries, the WHO declared the outbreak a public health emergency of international concern and then a pandemic on 11th March 2020. As Italy, Iran, South Korea and Japan reported increasing number of cases. Later that month, the number of cases outside of China quickly surpassed the number of cases inside China. On 31st January 2020, Italy had its first confirmed cases to tourists from China. As of 13 March 2020, the WHO considered Europe the active center of the pandemic. Cases by country across Europe had doubled over periods of typically 3 to 4 days, with some countries showing doubling every 2 days. As of 17 March, all countries within Europe had a confirmed case of COVID-19, with Montenegro being the last European country to report at least one case. At least one death has been reported in all of European countries, apart from the Vatican City. As on 18 March, more than 250 million people were in lockdown in Europe. The worst affected European countries were Russia, France, Spain, United Kingdom and Italy. By 26th March, the United States had overtaken China and Italy with the highest number of confirmed cases in the world. The pandemic was confirmed to have reached Oceania on 25th January 2020, with the first confirmed case reported in Melbourne of Australia. It has since spread elsewhere in the region, although many small Pacific Island nations have thus far avoided the outbreak by closing their international borders. 6 Oceania sovereign states have yet to report a case: Kiribati, the Federated States of Micronesia, Nauru, Palau, Tonga and Tuvalu. Australia and New Zealand have been praised for their handling of pandemic compared to other Western nations, with the latter wiping out all community transmission of the virus.
Some countries in the Mekong region, New Zealand, Rwanda, and many island states across the Caribbean and the Pacific were able to suppress the virus early. New Zealand is seen as a global exemplar, and over the weekend, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern celebrated 100 days with no community transmission, while stressing the need to remain cautious.
In October 2020, the WHO stated at a special meeting of its leaders that 1 in 10 people around the world may have been infected with COVID-19. At that time, it translated to 780 million people being infected, while only 35 million infections being confirmed. On 9th November 2020, the United States surpassed 10 million confirmed cases of COVID-19, making it the country with the most cases worldwide by a large margin. As of December 2020, more than 73 million cases have been reported worldwide due to COVID-19, more than 1.6 million have died, and more than 41 million people have recovered. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Well, the swift and massive shock of the coronavirus pandemic and shutdown measures to contain it plunged the global economy into a severe contraction. It is the worst global economic crisis since the Great Depression. The economic crisis began due to the economic consequences of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. The first major sign of a recession was the collapse of the markets during the 2020 stock market crash, which began in late February and lasted through March. Modeling by the World Bank suggests that in some regions, a full recovery will not be achieved until 2025 or beyond. Here's how the economy performed in 2020.
When the pandemic first arose in late 2019 and more consequently in 2020, the world was going through economic stagnation and significant consumer downturn. Most economists believed a recession, though one which would not be particularly severe, was coming. As a result of the rapid spread of the pandemic, economies across the world initiated lockdowns to curb the spread of the pandemic. This resulted in the collapse of various industries and consumerism all at once, which put major pressure on banks and employment.
It is now clear that we have entered a recession as bad or worse than in 2009. We do project recovery in 2021. In fact, there may be a sizable rebound, but only if we succeed with containing the virus everywhere and prevent liquidity problems from becoming a solvency issue.
Then the stock market crashed, and thereafter the recession. With new social distancing measures taken in response to the pandemic, lockdowns occurred across much of the world economy. The pandemic has led to severe global economic disruption. The postponement or cancellation of sporting, religious and political or cultural activities. Schools, universities and colleges have closed either on a nationwide or local basis in 80 countries, affecting approximately 61.6% of the world's student population. Many governments have restricted or advised against all non-essential travel to and from countries and areas affected by the outbreak. The COVID-19 pandemic has had far-reaching consequences beyond the spread of the disease and efforts to quarantine it. As the pandemic has spread around the globe, concerns have shifted from supply-side manufacturing issues to decreased business in the services sector. The pandemic is considered unanimously as a major factor in causing the recession. The pandemic has affected nearly every major industry negatively. Remittances are of special concern. Over previous decades, remittances have played an increasingly important role in alleviating poverty and sustaining growth. Just last year, these flows were on par with foreign direct investment and official development assistance. But COVID-19 has spurred a dramatic reversal, with the World Bank's forecast finding that remittances will decline 14% by the end of year 2021. The pandemic slowdown has deeply impacted businesses and jobs. Around the world, companies, especially micro, small and medium enterprises or MSMEs in the developing world are under intense strain, with more than half either in arrears or likely to fall into arrears shortly. The reduction in the demand for travel and the lack of factory activity due to the COVID-19 pandemic significantly impacted demand for oil, causing its price to fall. The Russian-Saudi Arabia oil price war became a cause in worsening the recession due to its crushing the price of oil. However, there is some good news. Economies around the world rebounded at a stronger than expected pace in the third quarter from the COVID-19 economic crash.
We continue to project a deep recession in 2020. Global growth is projected to be minus 4.4%, which is a small upgrade from June. This upgrade owes to somewhat less dire outcomes in the second quarter, as well as signs of a stronger recovery in the third quarter, offset partially by downgrades in some emerging and developing economies. In 2021, growth is projected to rebound to 5.2%, slightly below our June projection.
All 37 nations with nominal GDP greater than $200 billion that had reported real GDP data by December posted economic growth in the 3 months to September, a dramatic turnaround from the second quarter data, for which showed that 31 of 34 economies were in recession. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Well, the ongoing coronavirus pandemic sent several scheduled global summits into a tailspin. Many important summits were either cancelled or postponed, and those that happened mostly took place virtually. Leaders around the world had to adapt to a new way of communicating. meetings on the sidelines could not take place, and hence diplomacy saw a new dimension. Here's more on some of the summits that took place in 2020.
The 75th session of the United Nations General Assembly, UNGA, was chaired by a Turkish national for the first time. Leaders of the UN member states addressed the world through a video conference due to COVID-19 restrictions. The General Assembly officially started on September 15 and was adjourned on October 5th.
National sovereignty, a pillar of the United Nations, goes hand in hand with enhanced international cooperation based on common values and shared responsibilities in pursuit of progress for all. No one wants a world government, but we must work together to improve world governance. In an interconnected world, we need a networked multilateralism in which the United Nations family, international financial institutions, regional organizations, trading blocs, and others work together more closely and more effectively.
This year's theme for the General Assembly was "The Future We Want, the United Nations We Need." Reaffirming our collective commitment, multilateralism in the time of COVID-19. President Trump urged the UN to hold China accountable for COVID-19.
We must hold accountable the nation which unleashed this plague onto the world, China. In the earliest days of the virus, China locked down travel domestically while allowing flights to leave China and infect the world. The United Nations must hold China accountable for their actions.
From Atmanirbhar Bharat, the fight against coronavirus, women empowerment to India's ties with neighboring countries, Prime Minister Narendra Modi touched upon a wide range of topics in almost 30 minutes long speech.
भारत की वैक्सीन प्रोडक्शन और वैक्सीन डिलीवरी क्षमता पूरी मानवता को इस संकट से बाहर निकालने के लिए काम आएगी। वैक्सीन की डिलीवरी के लिए कोल्ड चेन और स्टोरेज जैसी क्षमता बढ़ाने में भी भारत सभी की मदद करेगा।
On November 17, 2020, the 12th BRICS or 2020 BRICS Summit was held virtually and was hosted by Russia. The theme of the 12th BRICS Summit was Global Stability, Shared Security and Innovative Growth. It was attended by the heads of state or heads of government of the 5 member states, Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa. In his address at the 12th BRICS Summit, Prime Minister Modi said the biggest problem facing the world is terrorism. He highlighted the issue of credibility and effectiveness of the institutions for global governance and urged other BRICS members for the support. As the world is hopeful for COVID-19 vaccines, India underscored the issue of cooperation amongst BRICS partners on the production of the COVID-19 vaccines.
भारत का मानना है कि यूएन सिक्योरिटी काउंसिल में रिफॉर्म्स बहुत ही अनिवार्य है। इस विषय पर हमें अपने ब्रिक्स पार्टनर्स के समर्थन की अपेक्षा है। यूएन के अतिरिक्त कई अन्य अंतर्राष्ट्रीय संस्थाएं भी वर्तमान वास्तविकताओं के अनुसार काम नहीं कर रहे हैं। WTO, IMF, WHO जैसे इंस्टीट्यूशंस में भी सुधार होना चाहिए।
Meanwhile, China offered to cooperate with BRICS member nations for production of COVID-19 vaccines. Beijing said it supported the BRICS counter-terrorism strategy.
China has joined the COVAX facility. We will actively consider providing vaccines to BRICS countries where there is a need.
Russian President Vladimir Putin also spoke at the 12th BRICS Summit. for the development of the COVID-19 vaccines, Russia called for joint support by the BRICS nations. Moscow also laid a stress on the establishment of a Center for Development and Research of BRICS vaccines. The 20th Summit of SCO Council of Heads of State was held on November 10, 2020. The meeting was chaired by the President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin. Prime Minister Narendra Modi led the Indian delegation. Other SCO member states were represented by their presidents, while India and Pakistan were represented at the level of Prime Minister. Prime Minister Modi reiterated India's firm belief in regional peace, security and prosperity and raising voice against terrorism, smuggling of illegal weapons, drugs and money laundering.
भारत का शांति, सुरक्षा और समृद्धि पर दृढ़ विश्वास है और हमने हमेशा आतंकवाद, अवैध हथियारों की तस्करी, ड्रग्स और मनी लॉन्ड्रिंग के विरोध में आवाज उठाई है। भारत एससीओ चार्टर में निर्धारित सिद्धांतों के अनुसार एससीओ के तहत काम करने की अपनी प्रतिबद्धता में दृढ़ रहा है, परंतु यह दुर्भाग्यपूर्ण है कि एससीओ एजेंडा में बार-बार अनावश्यक रूप से द्विपक्षीय मुद्दों को लाने के प्रयास हो रहे हैं, जो एससीओ चार्टर और संघाई स्पिरिट का उल्लंघन करते हैं।
On July 15, 2020, the 15th Indian-European Union Summit 2020 was held via video conferencing. The Indian delegation at the India-EU Summit was led by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, while the European side was headed by the President of the European Council, Charles Michel. A joint declaration on resource efficiency was also signed. The 16th India-EU Summit will be held in the year 2021. The 2020 G20 Riyadh Summit was the 15th meeting of Group of 20. It was scheduled to take place in Riyadh, the capital city of Saudi Arabia, on 21-22 November 2020. However, due to COVID-19 pandemic, it was held virtually. On 12 November 2020, Prime Minister Narendra Modi virtually participated in the 17th ASEAN-India Summit at the invitation of Vietnamese Prime Minister Nguyen Xuan Phuc, the current chair of ASEAN. The summit saw the participation of all 10 ASEAN members.
Besides vast market potentials and robust economic growth, offer numerous opportunities for trade and investment. We'll be able to work out effective ways and means to further energize our ASEAN-India cooperation.
Speaking at the summit, Prime Minister Modi underlined the centrality of ASEAN in Act East policy of India. He stated that a cohesive, responsive and prosperous ASEAN is the center to India's Indo-Pacific vision and contributes to security and growth for all in the region.
हम मानते हैं कि सिक्योरिटी एंड ग्रोथ फॉर ऑल इन द रीजन के लिए एक कोहेसिव एंड रिस्पॉन्सिव आसियान आवश्यक है।
ASEAN member nations have a total population of 650 million people and a combined GDP of $2.8 trillion. India is the fourth largest trading partner in ASEAN with about $86.9 billion trade. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Well, hands over the heart in a prayer pose, a little bow of the head, a gesture of respect, an acknowledgement of our shared humanity and no touching. People the world over chose to ditch the handshakes and hugs for fear of contracting the coronavirus. India's Namaste became and continues to be a perfect pandemic greeting. I'll leave you with visuals of the world saying Namaste.